Hello, everyone. Welcome to Couples Create Cashflow. My name is Jordan Johnson. Today, we are going to talk about the FIRE movement. And really, my goal today is to look at what are the goals of the FIRE movement? What does it really mean to retire early? And then also look at, is there a better way? Because I believe there is. So let me share my screen and we'll get started with the presentation. All right, so here we go. What is the FIRE movement? FIRE stands for Financially Independent, Retire Early. That's just the quick, dirty way of saying it. Sometimes people just say financially independent. So you might just see FI instead of FIRE. These folks are very focused on reaching a total accumulation of investments and savings where they could choose not to work anymore. So your money gets to be large enough, the accumulation of your cash, your investments gets to be large enough where your interest that you're earning or the growth on your portfolio is high enough to where it covers the annual expenses that you have. So most of the people are using the 4% rule in the FIRE community. And the 4% rule just basically says, what is your annual expenses? Multiply that by 25, and that's your FIRE number. So if you accumulate that much money, then you'll be able to retire early, you'll be done. So that means that if you had a $50,000 a year annual expense and you multiply that by 25, your financial independence number, your FIRE number would be 1,250,000. So that leaves three variables to achieving financial independence: your income, your expenses, and then your investment growth rate after inflation. So the 4% rule is really coming from a place of the average stock market performance of around 7%, and then the average inflation rate of about 3%. That leaves about 4%. And so if you're looking at a long chunk of years, you can kind of guess that you'll have about that kind of performance in your stock portfolio, especially if you buy index funds and you are looking at just trying to capture the growth of the US economy, and you're not trying to just buy into individual stocks. By the way, that is the strategy for most people. A lot of them quote J.L. Collins' Simple Path to Wealth, or John Bogle's book about index funds versus other funds. So basically the idea is you can't beat the market. So you have to just join the market. And that's fine. So the 4% rule says if your money's grown at 7 and inflation has taken away 3, then you have 4% that you can take out, and it doesn't actually affect the principal. So if you want to reach financial independence as fast as possible, then you'd want to either increase your income, decrease your expenses, or just get a better growth rate. They also talk about what's called a savings rate. The savings rate is really how much money you have left over each month. And a lot of times it's expressed in a percentage rate. So for example, if you bring in 5,000 per month and are able to save 1,000 of the 5,000, then you'd have a savings rate of 20%. And a lot of times the savings rate is used because it's a little bit better indicator of what your number you're shooting for your financial independence number. You're usually looking to try to get about 50 to 60% of a savings rate. So in this hypothetical scenario, if somebody brings in $5,000 in a month, they would actually be shooting to save about $2,500 per month. And the reason why is that the faster that you save, the faster you reach financial independence. So your savings rate is really the crucial number. You'll see some people out there that live so frugally that they can get by very little of an expense per month, but there are a lot of other people that really struggle to get that number to be larger than 20%. This strategy does work, no matter what percentage rate you have for your savings rate. It's just you do run into this particular situation where if you only save like 10% a year, you really can't retire any earlier than you normally would have. So if you get up to that 50 to 60% rule for the savings rate, you can retire 10, 15, 20, sometimes 25 years early. It just really depends on your situation and how well your investments do, to be honest. All right, so the goals, if you're trying to achieve FIRE, you will have the primary goal of accumulating 25 times your annual expenses in order to get to that 4% rule. And I will say, some people are using more of like a 3.5% rule or a 3% rule, where you would really just be multiplying your annual expenses by more than 25. So it could be 30. Really, you're looking at a safer withdrawal rate to not deplete your principal balance of your investments. But that does come with another risk, which is how long do you need to save, and what are you scrimping and saving to get by in the meantime. But in general, that is something that's very much in your control. I mean, you can definitely control when you leave a job, and you can definitely control what withdrawal rate you're shooting for. But typically, your main goal is to get at 25 times your annual expenses. Some secondary goals would be to increase your income, because if you increase your income, that makes it a lot easier to save. You can decrease your expenses. You could live as frugal as possible, do the Dave Ramsey rice and beans routine, try to really limit how much you spend in categories that are variable expenses. There might be some things that you can't really change, but for the things that you can really look at how do you cut costs. Especially if you look at it like, it's going to take me 10 years. So for 10 years, I'm choosing to live this way. And then I can kind of relax it a little bit. Another secondary goal would be to save or invest money in a place that offers low volatility and predictable annual growth. Because what you're really looking for is to not go backwards in how much money you have. So you wouldn't want to invest in something that could potentially go down by 50, 60, 70%, aka Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies. You're really looking for something that has a lot less volatility. So bonds, long-term savings, money market accounts, high yield savings accounts, things like that are usually where people like to park their money. They also like predictable annual growth. The stock market can actually be too risky for some people. And so it can be much easier for them to wrap their minds around just putting that money in a bank. I will say that up until recently, that was a poor move because you'd only get 0.02% interest on your money in a savings account. However, right now, banks are offering 3-4%, which is great. But I think part of it is the response to the government increasing the prime rate, which means we're going to also be paying more for loans that we take out. So that's probably another video. And then you'd repeat this process until you get that accumulated amount that you're going for. Okay. Here's some impact of these goals. So what I want to say first is that I don't think any of those goals are bad. I really don't. But what I can see sometimes is, like anything, if you take it to the extreme, things can sometimes be a problem. So these are some things that happen when you're going on the path to FIRE. You have a high motivation to reach your FIRE number, which is fantastic. If people know what their numbers are, they know where they need to go, if they have a really clear path, oftentimes they do really well. Usually that's the part that really motivates people and gets them going. Choosing to say no to purchases until they really are necessary, because you really want to keep that spending low. So this could mean, hey, we're not going on vacation for 10 years. It could mean we're not buying a car for 10 years. It could mean, we're not going to get insurance. It could mean we're not going to pay extra to eat out. We're not going to buy streaming services each month. We're not going to, whatever it ends up being, right? Could literally just say no to a bunch of different purchases. And I just mentioned that as well. Vacations, leisure, entertainment usually takes a backseat. And also there's this heightened awareness of every dollar that leaves your possession, right? So usually in a couple, I like to talk to couples. Usually there's what Dave Ramsey would refer to as the free spirit and the nerd. So the nerd is the one who keeps the spreadsheet, and the free spirit is the one who spends the money. And a lot of times in relationships, there usually is somebody who is more into the money and the numbers, and the other person's more about, hey, we just need to spend this money because it's part of our monthly budget. We need to make sure we have the things that we need. All right. Some of these impacts continued. There could be an increased interest in investment strategies. So as you have more money to work with, you do typically find that you want to find a way to invest it properly. You want to get the best return on your investment. You want to understand investment strategies better. And so there's usually an increase in education in this area, which is great. That's my own personal story. Like when I had a little bit of extra money every month, I was like, wow, I really need to make sure I put this in a good place. I need to have a strategy for what I'm going to do with my money. So it can really motivate you to get into some new learning areas and really find out some new things about financial strategies. There can be an aversion to taking on debt. You don't want to take out any new loans. You don't want to borrow any money for any reason. And you want to pay off those loans as fast as possible. Totally fine with that. most of the time, that's a really good thing. And a lot of times it's based on the Dave Ramsey debt snowball idea or some other people's debt avalanche idea. The idea that you're trying to get these monthly payments down to almost nothing and to really not owe anybody anything, which is fine. I will say, caveat, I think that paying off a house really early, if your interest rate's at 2 or 3%, might be something worth talking about, thinking about, running the numbers on. The other thing about the FIRE goals would be you really don't want risk or volatility, so something that's really predictable. And then sometimes there's this putting retirement on a pedestal, this idea that life might be hard now, but when I reach FIRE, everything will get easier. And in some ways, that's true, right? When money is no longer a stressful thing, then you can enjoy life a little bit more. As a therapist, I would say that life being stressful could maybe be something that is going to happen whether you have lots of money or not. Some of it is your mindset, how you choose to look at it. Also, is it really about life getting easier? Sometimes people get to the point where they work really hard and then they don't have anything to do, and then life is easier, and then they get depressed because they have nothing to do. So there can be some issues with that, actually. And then there's also a fierce desire to be independent from outside sources and influences as much as possible. So a rise in the desire to be self-sufficient, to not let anybody else tell them what to do, or not really owing anybody anything, right? This idea that the borrower is the slave to the lender. Don't want to be anybody's slave. I don't want to have to rely on the government to provide what I need, or big business or big banks or any of that. I just kind of want to do my own thing, go live off grid, that kind of thing. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's really, really good to have an intense focus on a financial goal. So many people I talk to, so many couples I talk to really do not have financial goals, or they haven't talked about it before. And so when you start digging down and you say, hey, what are your financial goals? They may not really know what to tell you. But I will say having some financial goals like retirement, like early retirement, can really be a visionary call to the marriage and to the couple to say, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to focus on. This is something really important to us. And this is a strategy that then we can implement, and we've seen other people be successful. So this is something that we can kind of hang our hat on and go with. It also usually lends a good knowledge of monthly numbers. So usually you can't really increase your savings and decrease your spending if you don't really know what your numbers are. And so when you know your numbers, fantastic. You can really know exactly where each dollar is going. A lot of times, folks in the FIRE movement do not make impulsive money decisions. They think about it and they think about it, and they really want to evaluate all the pros and cons before they invest money into something or pay for something. If they see how it could possibly make them money in the future, then they're good with it. But if they can't really see it making them money, it can be a challenge to get that money spent. And sometimes the money shouldn't be spent. Fair. And usually impulse buys are where people leak out a lot of money in their monthly budget. So this can be actually a very positive thing. They have a clear picture of where they're going and how to get there. The 4% rule, as simple as it is, has really been a roadmap for a lot of people. Just to say, it's really that simple. I could just buy index funds and just watch it grow. And once it hits a certain number, I could retire. Like, that's it. And for a lot of people, that's kind of a wake-up call, and it's a great place to start. So I think that's great. And then usually folks on the FIRE path have a higher net worth than their peers. They really do. A lot of times it's because they've reduced their expenses, they've reduced their liabilities, they've reduced their, the loans and the debts that they have, and they've increased their savings, they've increased their investments, their total assets has increased, so their net worth has as well. It's a great thing. Find that you have a lot of more options at that point. So as we look at the FIRE movement, here are some things that I kind of see as potential cons. I see a lot of people talking about high percentage of their investment going into qualified plans like Roth IRAs and 401ks, mostly because of the tax advantage. If you're trying to keep your taxable income down right now, you'd want to go with that 401k strategy. And if you want to keep your taxable growth down, you'd want to go with the Roth, right? And that's great. That's fine. I think you got to make sure you consider taxes when you invest. That is a big, big part of it. However, I really don't like the lack of liquidity. I don't like the fact that if I put money into an IRA, I can't really touch it till I retire, that I can't really do anything with it. And if we look at how inflation affects our lives on long terms, long stretches, we really lose a lot of buying power over the course of 10, 20, 30 years. And so even if my investments in my 401k do grow, I would actually rather use those stronger today dollars to get into some investments that are controllable and be able to get out of investments if I feel like I need to. I know you can do that within the IRAs. I'm not really saying you can't rebalance your portfolio or anything like that, but I do feel like having the liquidity in case something goes wrong is important, because I see some young adults throw tons of money into the retirement funds, and then they have to buy a car, they have to buy a house, they have to pay for a medical expense or something, and they just don't have the funds in their checking account to do that. And then they're looking at, well, do I cash out a retirement fund and get the 10% penalty, or do I end up getting a loan, or run up a credit card, or it puts you in a place where things are not ideal. So you need to have a plan for liquidity if you're going to put a ton of money into these qualified plans. There's also a really strong desire to pay off your house. Totally fine. I think that's great. The only downside would be, let's say you've paid off 80% of your house. That's great, except for the fact that you don't have access to any of that money. All that money is just in the value of the house, your equity. It's untapped and it's not liquid. And so if something goes wrong, then you're left with running up a credit card, or maybe you go apply for a HELOC, which HELOCs are actually my jam. I think HELOCs are great. So this desire to pay the house off does create more net worth, and that's great. It doesn't necessarily make your life any better. If you can pay your house off completely, then you gain back the principal and interest payment that you would normally be paying. I think there's people out there that forget that the taxes and insurance part of your mortgage payment will always be something you have to pay for. So don't just think that your entire monthly payment that you pay right now is going to go away when the time comes for you to pay off your house. You do need to consider the fact that you're going to have to save money every month for taxes and save money every month for insurance. I also have a problem with people who have refinanced in the last few years that have a mortgage that's at 2 or 3%, and they are using their money, their dollars, to pay that off faster, when in reality, there's really not a lot of interest that's accruing in those accounts. And the fact that it's a pretty stable payment, I think it's just better to keep it sometimes. So I think it's better to kind of have the ability to pay off that house if you need to, if you have enough invested to be able to pay that off. But I do think there could be definitely a challenge if for some reason you run into a situation where you need cash quickly. It takes a little bit to access that equity. I also have a problem with folks that decide that they're going to go on this FIRE path and think that because they're buying index funds that they're well diversified. And I would just say diversification within the stock and bond market is still just participating in just the stock market. I think you need to get outside of the stock market if you really want to have true diversification. So you need to be part of a business, or own a business, or run a business. You need to have some kind of real estate, something that gets you outside of the system, gold, or some kind of asset that's a true hard asset. It's really important. I think we've learned that with inflation. We've learned that with the ups and downs of the economy here since 2020, that we really do need to watch what the Federal Reserve is doing with printing money, what inflation is doing, what supply chain issues look like, and the cost of goods going up. We need to know that the money that we're holding is going to be valuable in 20 years from now. And so part of that means we need to invest into real products and real assets, like a house, like a business, and then paper assets do not create consistent cash flow at a rate where you could live off them without selling. I recently did a video where I tested the 4% rule on VOO, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 index fund. We looked back 5 years at the performance, and we ran a scenario that somebody hit their 4% rule right at the end of 2018. Just kind of looking at how that, or the beginning of 2018, just kind of looked at how the last 5 years would have played out for them. And one thing that stood out to me was that their balance was higher after 5 years than it was when they started, which is fantastic. Our growth rates were really high some of these years, so that might be above average performance. We got to think about that. But I also noticed that if you were to just take the dividend payments of VOO, you would get about $49,000 to $51,000 each year. And that's okay. But most people are looking for a higher annual expenses like that. And actually in our scenario, we were saying that at the annual expenses were actually $100,000. And so that's a little higher lifestyle than most people in the FIRE movement are usually shooting for. But I wanted to just make a point that your dividends, so you could just take those dividends as payments. That does count as income, right? Obviously, but you could take those as payments. That'd be half of what you need for the year. So there is something to be said about that. But then you're selling off shares of the rest to be able to fund your lifestyle. So I have a hard time selling off assets just to fund a lifestyle, because even if the value of the asset's growing, I am losing my ownership stake, my position. I'm divesting, not investing. And so I'm thinking about this as, how do I keep the asset and just have the asset pay for my expenses? Two more things. I'm seeing a strong desire to leave a job that someone doesn't like, with a lot of pressure on either the performance of their investments or that they can last in a job that they hate. And sometimes they don't have a plan for after they leave their job. I don't think that any of us should really suffer through a job we hate just to get to FIRE. I think there are ways to either rethink how we think about work, or to negotiate different work conditions, look at upward mobility, or look at what you can do to move around in your company. I think there's just a lot of options that people don't consider. But I do see some issues with someone going from working 45 to 50 hours a week, and then, oh, I'm retiring, shutting it down, and then wondering, what am I going to do now that I'm retired? Like, I hated my corporate job, I'm never going back. Well, now what, right? You have plenty of time to do something. What are you going to do? And maybe they go off and they explore the world, they vacation and do all that. But I really do think that that is hard, to go from telling yourself no for a long time to telling yourself yes. I've read the book, The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. I think there's some things about that book are a little sketchy, but overall, I do like the fact that he's talking about lifestyle design. He's talking about the ability to basically decide what you want your life to look like, and then working a business opportunity into that to create the income you need to live your lifestyle the way you want. The freedom of time and the freedom of location really creates a totally different lifestyle value, and the happiness that comes with having free time and free location. And the funds to do what you need to, or what you want to. You can also tap into some generosity that you weren't able to before. So I do think that there's definitely something to be said about, what are you retiring from and what are you retiring to? Is there something that's more the purpose of your life, something that's really into kind of the soul of who you are, that has been looking for a way to be useful, but at the same time, it's just one of those things that if you aren't sure of how you're going to tap into that usefulness, you may actually have a hard time once you're retired. And then the suggestions I have here are really more about the ways that you can consider financial independence. I'm looking at this as a question mark of, do we really have to accumulate in order to retire, or can we look more at cash flow? Because really what you need with your assets is the ability to pay your monthly expenses. So when I look at the retirement quotient, I'm looking at the financial independence could actually be your cash flow from your assets is actually greater than your monthly expenses. So instead of looking at it like the 4% rule, where we're looking at your annual spending times 25 is your target number, and once you hit it, you're done. I'm looking at it more like, you could reach financial independence if you have enough cash flow from your assets to be more than what your monthly expenses are. And the reason why it's important to consider this is that you can use leverage. And I don't consider leverage to be the same as debt. Leverage is about tapping into other people's money to buy an asset that can produce cash flow, and that the value of the asset is always greater than the leverage or the loan you have against it. I'm looking at debt more as your leverage or your loan is going to be greater than the value of the property or the asset. So like, let's say I bought a rental property for $100,000 and I bought it with a loan of 75,000, but then the house goes down to 50,000 for some reason, then I am in debt. My position is net negative. But if I have a house that I buy for 100,000 with a $75,000 loan and the house goes up to 150,000 and I still have 70,000 left on my loan, I mean, I'm actually not in debt. I owe the bank 70,000, but I've used the bank's money to put myself in an ownership position of an asset that produces money every month. And so it's not the same as debt. It's really more about using other people's money to get into an asset that can produce a cash flow. And then once you pay that off, you can actually have a larger cash flow. All right, so the last little bit here, we're going to talk about 3 different number examples. We're going to look at 3 different 35-year-olds who are going to try 3 different strategies. Number 1 is the 4% rule. Robert, he's 35 years old. And in all 3 examples, our 3 different characters will have the exact same starting financials. We've got an income of $7,500 a month, expenses of $4,000 a month, which would be $4,800 annually. And we have the cash flow of $3,500 a month out of those numbers. So that's a very good savings rate of 47%. And this may seem like, you know, these numbers might not be that accurate, but what I'll say is if we're talking about someone who's on the path to fire, they would be looking at an income and expense ratio of, you know, a savings rate of 47%. That would be a target that they would be shooting for. So try to make it kind of match up with someone who has already decided to cut their expenses and increase their income and is really looking to get to that financial independence, retire early status. Here is our cash flow. So we're dealing with the same cash flow number for all 3, but in this scenario, we're not focusing so much on the cash flow. We're more focusing on the savings target. So we're looking at our expenses being 48,000, and we're saying 48 times 25 would be 1.2 million. So I ran the numbers on the Playing with Fire website. So Playing with Fire is a documentary that really talks about the idea of using your financial independence, retire early strategies to retire early. So this particular character with these numbers would retire in 19 years at age 54. And that's when we consider a 4% savings rate over the course of time. And I think I did a portfolio, because you can play around with the portfolio balance between the stocks and the bonds. And I believe I put a 75 and a 25%. Actually, I can jump out here. Yeah, so I did 70% stocks, 25% bonds, and 5% cash. And you can kind of see here on this that people start low, work their way up, and the orange is how much they put in for savings, and the darker orange is what the portfolio did for growth. And this is assuming a 7% yield on the stock market. So that's our first step. And then, so I guess our target here would be 54 years old, a 19-year horizon. All right, example number 2 is Cashflow Charlie. Cashflow Charlie has the same numbers as 4% rule Robert, but what he's doing is he's buying a rental property, and we're going to look at an average here, and really it's hard to give a good average when you look at a plan like this, because usually how it works is someone gets into real estate investing and they start with one property, and then they buy a duplex, and then maybe they buy another duplex, and then they maybe buy a quadplex, and then maybe they get into an apartment complex. And there's usually a growth as far as how many doors per unit they are looking at. But in general, what I'm going to say is that per door or per unit, we are looking at a cash flow of $200 per unit per month. And we're looking at a down payment per unit as $50,000, right? So we're saying we have to generate $50,000 of savings in order to buy a $200,000 unit. And that's because Usually when you're buying rental properties, you need a 25% down payment. And so if we look at this and we say, okay, we need our cash flow to be $4,000. That's our expenses every month. Then we need 20 deals at $200 a month for cash flow to get to $4,000 per month. All right, so let's look at this one for a minute. The time to financial independence is actually shorter. It's 16.2 years. Person would be 51 years old, and the assets that they would have under their control at the end, the total value of the homes would be over $4 million. I will show a graph in just a minute, or a chart in a minute, but really the $4 million is based on the after repair value, or the purchase price, not so much on any growth in the housing market. So that number could very easily be higher. And then this person also enjoys tax savings on their mortgage interest that they're paying. So if they put a 30-year loan on each property, they're paying a good chunk of mortgage interest every month. That's all tax deductible. So the money they're making on their $200 per month for their asset is actually going to be something that's offset by some of the mortgage interest that they're paying. They're also getting some tax savings on depreciation. So their house is getting depreciated each year by their accountant because there's wear and tear, that sort of thing. And then they can also do what's called a cash out refinance if they need more cash. So the cash out refinance is not considered taxable income. If you owe money on a property, and then you get a new loan on the property that gives you cash in your pocket, then you actually that's considered a different kind of transaction. So if I only owe $50,000 on a property that's worth $200, and I go to the bank and I say, hey, can I get a cash out refinance and bring the mortgage back up to $150,000? They'll give me $100,000 minus closing costs, basically. So this person has the ability to get liquid cash if they need to go invest and buy more properties if they really want to. So if I back out of this, jump over to my spreadsheet, jump over to Cashflow Charlie. So same numbers. We're looking at an annual income of $90,000, annual expenses of $48,000, annual cash flow of $42,000. We're looking at a deal price of $200,000, down payment of $50,000, and each property will give us $200 in cash flow, and our deals that we would need is 20. So what I did was I started this off here and said, for deal one, we need to get $50,000. We have a cash flow of $3,500. It's going to take us 14.29 months to get to that number, and then we're going to have the cash flow of the asset. The asset's value of $200,000. We're going to make that purchase, and then we're going to go add this $200 to our $3,500. And you'll see that our new cash flow is $3,700. And then we're going to have a new target of $50,000. And it's going to take us a little less. And we're going to add another $400. Our asset value is going to accumulate. And so over the course of 20 deals, we go from it taking about 14 months to save up to down at the end, it's only taking us about 6 months to save up everything we need for a down payment. And the total amount that we needed to cover of our expenses goes up to $4,000 by the time we get to the 20th deal. So there are some things like inflation. So our expenses will probably go up over the course of 16 years. It'll probably be a little different. And the cost of the real estate to buy is going to go up, but also the cost of rent will go up. So really, these numbers do not take into account inflation, but neither does the 4% rule technically. So we're really just looking at how long would it take us to do an average deal that would get us to this expenses. And so really to cover our expenses. So really now we're at 51.2, and that took us 16.2 years. Pretty good. Even better than the 4% rule because we're using the bank's money as leverage. We did not have to come up with $200,000 every single time we bought a real estate property, which, by the way, is what Dave Ramsey would say to do. And, we could run the numbers. I did not run the numbers doing that, but our cash flow would be much higher per deal if we did it that way, but it would take us a very long time to save up. I should run the numbers for a different video and see how that works. But all right. And then if we jump into our third example, I'm going to call this Burr Bill. The Burr method has been popularized by the Bigger Pockets community, namely David Green, who wrote the book about Burr. And Burr stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. So there's a lot of R's, but basically the idea is you buy an undervalued property, you fix it up, you put a renter in there, and then after a little bit, you refinance it to put it on a 30-year loan, pull the money out, and now you've got your money to go invest in something else. Okay, so same setup, same deal, same everything, except for with Burr Bill, we're going to do this faster. And actually, I needed to update these numbers because I calculated them wrong. But if we go to my spreadsheet, this is accurate now. So we're looking at the average deal price because we're buying a property that's distressed is going to be 100,000. And we're going to say it's going to take us 50,000 to rehab it. And then it's going to take us 6,000 just to hold it, which could be that we are paying somebody interest for their private money. In this case, we're actually going to show that we borrow from nobody. We literally just save all these dollars up ourselves, and the holding cost is really more about any other fees that might be paid as part of the title company transfer, any closing costs, that sort of thing. So then our average investment is 156. And then what I'm telling you is if I bought a $100,000 house, I put $50,000 into it, I would sure hope that the average retail value, or the after repair value, which is ARV, would actually be 175 or greater. I'm going to really conservatively go to 175, and then we'll just look at how this plays out. So this person starts trying to save up 156,000. He has no money to start with. He's got his same cash flow. It's going to take him 44 months. But while he's doing that, he's learning what is it like to invest in real estate. He's really spending some time because he knows he's not going to be able to put his money to work until he has enough to go buy these deals with cash, because a lot of times these deals don't come up unless you have cash. So basically the numbers are run, everything goes through. That first deal takes a lot of time, but after he's done, he gets a cash out refinance of 116,000. We look at the loan to value is 122.5. We're going to say there's some closing costs. So we're going to say that he actually does have a cash out value of 116. And so what I've done is I've said that's his money that starts the savings for the next one. So he only has to save 39,625 to get to the next deal. And so you can see it doesn't take quite as long. And by the end, he can turn this deal over every 5 months or so, which is fantastic. We've also seen the asset value over here continuing to go up, which is great. And we see that at the end of all this, he actually finishes in 187 months, which is 15.6 years. So if we compare that to normal investments, that is about 7 months quicker. Not a ton different, but the difference in this case would be, I feel like I'm really underestimating your after repair values. I feel like most of the time when you're buying these properties, you can get a pretty good deal on them, especially if you're buying cash, and your after repair value can go up pretty high. So I do feel like there's a lot more creativity that can be happening with these situations. And a lot of times it could actually be much better than this. But in general, this is how it would look. And then my last example is actually going to be if Burr Bill decided to leverage the equity in his house before he starts this process. And so instead of starting with 0, he starts with 50,000 as a loan from his HELOC. Now, not a loan, not like an amortized loan, but he takes 50,000 from his HELOC and he applies it to this strategy. So he cuts down that first savings from 44 months down to 30 months. All right. So then that means he goes through this whole process about 14 months faster. And so then he's done it 14.4 years, which is a retirement age of 49.4. So I hope this helps. It's kind of a quick overview of what I'm thinking about when I think about cash flow, because I feel like the number that you're trying to hit as the expenses are easier to manipulate. And if you can buy into cash flowing assets like real estate, you can be very picky about which deals you buy. You don't have to just go out and buy. You have a very strong amount of control when it comes to what you use your money on. Whereas with the stock market, if you buy an index fund, you have no control over what the index fund does. With this, you do have the housing market, the mortgage rates, all of that are outside of your control. But if you are saving cash for these purchases, it really doesn't matter what the interest rates are on 30-year loans, because you're going to make most of your money on the purchase and the rehab. So if the rehab takes longer or costs more money, then that's going to be a factor. Or maybe your deal is going to cost more money. In this case, he could maybe come across a deal that's a really, really lucrative apartment complex or something like that, and actually leverage his $156,000 in cash to put 10% down on a $1.5 million loan. And that would change the dynamics of this whole thing. So it's really, really hard to, once you get past a few deals, it's really, really hard to truly see exactly how it's going to go. But usually that means it's going to go better than what you think, because as you learn more about investing in real estate, you really do learn more of the tricks of the trade. You start to see how it's not impossible to get an average cash flow of $200. It may be more possible than you think, and it actually might be easier to get a $300 cash flow than you might think. The other thing about all this is you could sell some of these properties, these lower properties, and start targeting larger properties, or you could get these multiplexes, things like that. So I just want to show with the numbers that Burr with a HELOC, 49 years old, 14.4 years, 4% rule, Robert, 19 years. I mean, that's 5 years faster. So anyways, I got to go. It's good to see everybody. I hope you all are doing well, and I look forward to having another conversation in the future.